Artistic images and artifacts of and by black Americans, 2 centuries worth, from slavery times through the Civil War, emancipation and Reconstruction, through Jim Crow and segregation, through trouble and turbulence, to new expressions of pride and civil rights and selfhood.
CBS presents For Our Times. Today, The Hidden Heritage. Here is CBS News correspondent Douglas Edwards.
February has been designated Black History Month. As part of that ongoing recollection, we're pleased to take another look at a unique art exhibit that is itself a chronicle of black history and progress. Called 2 Centuries of Black American Art, the exhibit was filmed at the High Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, for a special broadcast a few years ago and is condensed for today's presentation. The exhibit was assembled from works found in private homes, various museums and galleries, and individual collections throughout the United States by distinguished art historian David Driscoll, chairman of the art department at the University of Maryland and the former chairman of art at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. He will guide us on our tour of the exhibit.
Some of the pieces that we found date back to the 1700s, one of the earliest times when blacks were participating in the craftsmanship area of workmanship in the arts. And it begins with the crafts, with the making of forms that are serviceably oriented in the home, forms that have come all the way from Africa. The patterns, for example, in this coverlet are very much akin to the patterns that one finds in a kente cloth from Ghana. This jug is one such functional form that we talked about, and it's the kind of thing that was used by the farmers, the ordinary people, to hold lard and hog killing time in the South. This was a very important piece of property to be used with that particular celebration. And it was a celebration in that this was a part of the harvest, the time when people would go out and prepare the meat for the remainder of the winter months ahead. A piece such as this mask, which comes to us from Louisiana, was dredged up from the Mississippi River, and it is assumed that it was a punitive form that may have been used in a voodoo ceremony of some sort. It has the characteristics that are peculiar to a mask that may have been carved by a Benin artist in Nigeria in the 17th, 18th, or even the 19th century. The facial features are very much the same. The walking cane, which carries some of the signs and symbols, even though this particular one was made in the 1930s, it still carries with it some of the signs and symbols of the African heritage out of which it has come. An alligator may symbolize the pace at which a man moves about. A serpent or a snake may symbolize the youthfulness of a person moving about swiftly. And so the cane is carved in the same fashion as it had been carved in Africa. This tradition continues even into our own time. We're now looking at the work of Joshua Johnston, one of the first black American artists to show his accomplishment as a portrait artist. Johnston worked roughly between the periods of 1790 and 1820, and many of the works by this talented young artist obviously have been lost. He was no different from any other American artist of the time. He painted portraits for his living, with the exception that he obviously was a man of color. He lived in the city of Baltimore and advertised his services as one of the important painters of the time. He boasted of his genius at being self-taught and talked about the obstacles that he had to overcome to be able to take into clients the wealthy merchant families who came to him to seek his work. And it's assumed that he may have even bought his freedom by painting wealthy families who lived in the vicinity of Baltimore and the Eastern Shore. This painting, Lady on a Red Sofa, is one of the finest examples of his artistry and shows the general workmanship as well as the craftsmanship of the period characteristic of the primitive style for which he is noted. We're now looking at the work of Edward M. Bannister in Providence, Rhode Island, the other black American artist whose works were represented in the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. His work was characterized by some as being romantic, realistic in its appearance, but most of all, he too was concerned with the portrayal of his environment, of the land in the vicinity of Narragansett Bay that he loved so much. Possibly one of the most interesting of the compositions that he painted was fishing, sometimes referred to as the boating party. This particular composition shows his love of nature as well as his acquaintance with the human figure. Henry O. Tanner provides the necessary link that we need between the 19th century and the 20th century. His work is akin to that produced by the American masters in Europe and by those who were working at home. Tanner felt that he could not sufficiently go along with the injustices which he inherited in being born a black American as an artist in this particular hemisphere, and so he decided that he must go to Europe. Thus he became an expatriate, spending most of his time in Paris, where he set up studio and worked until his death in 1937. Tanner was a firm believer in painting what he referred to as the great religious experience. And in many of his paintings, we see what comes out of the Old Testament tradition, those themes that reflect biblical history. Archibald Motley brings us into the period that we refer to as the Negro Renaissance. This was a period in the 1920s when Harlem came alive with the sounds and the echoes of the new movement, the new Negro movement as it was referred to in that great city. And in the 1920s, the clamor behind the ending of the First World War, with the black soldiers having gone to Europe, having fought in the lines with soldiers of other countries, came back disillusioned and somewhat concerned about their plight in American society. With the advent of men and their philosophical thoughts, like Marcus Garvey, the teachings of W.B. Du Bois and others, this was to change the tempo of the time, and America was never to be the same again. Black artists started reflecting this attitude in their work. They painted, sculpted, and carved images of dignity which reflected their glorious past. This work, a portrait of the artist's grandmother, shows the new dignity. Aaron Douglas was a mural painter as well as an easel painter. He decorated many walls throughout the United States, in New York, in Chicago, in Nashville. And his work became a symbol for the time in that he created the new image. He was called upon by James Weldon Johnson to create the images for God's trombone. And so we see him emerging as the principal figure in the Negro Renaissance, a man who has a clear vision of what the new times are about. And he shows this symbolically with a new form of artistry. This form, of course, is coupled with his knowledge of African art and a presence of what is in his own lifestyle. We see this in works such as Were You There When They Crucified My Lord, symbol of the crucifixion. A painting such as this, painted in 1927, reflecting not only the religious theme, but going deeply into the social implications of the time. This painting, called Judgment Day, follows the procedure of those that we've seen in the illustrations from God's trombone. And here again, the figure sways about in the composition symbolically, showing the rhythm of the time. And rhythm, of course, was very important in Douglas's work. And William H. Johnson, perhaps the first of the ethnic artists to break from the tradition of painting in what might be referred to as a sophisticated style. He returned to what he referred to as primitivism. And this primitive style was to go back to the idea of overlaying flat colors into space so as to create a new dimension. And this dimension was to show what he referred to as the lowly life of the people. Not lowly in the sense of character, but to show the suffering. But Johnson was not always caught up in what might be referred to as the primitive style. He had been influenced by Van Gogh, by Munch, and other artists in Europe. He had spent a great deal of time studying there. This particular painting, done in the 1930s, echoes that style, which is peculiar to a form of expression very much in the vein of the German expressionists of the period. Horace Pippin, a primitive artist who reflected what he remembered of his childhood scenes growing up in Pennsylvania and other places, and trying to recall Americana as he knew it, the Saturday night bath, decorating for Christmas, and such scenes that everyone is familiar with in Americana. Ellis Wilson, following the tradition of those painters who attempted to show us certain aspects of Southern rural life, brings us into the fields of the South, the tobacco fields, the corn fields, the cotton fields, and all of those areas which supplied the nation with a certain sense of economy and agriculture. And at the same time, he shows Caribbean life in the same spirit, the gaiety of life, reflecting impressionistically with color, showing his love of the land, love of the common people. These paintings done in the 1940s echo his knowledge and his love for the rural South. Richmond Barthé stands out as the major sculptor of the Negro Renaissance. He worked with the human figure, with heads, modeling animal forms, and showing the genius of his artistry at a time when many black Americans were not being permitted to exhibit in the major exhibitions throughout the country. He was fortunate in that his work was received in many of the major exhibitions that artists who did not belong to the majority culture had not been exhibiting. And yet, at the same time, he was looked upon by his contemporaries as their leader. He gives us a depiction of the artistry of his craft akin to that which was created in the bronzes of Ife and other bygone African civilizations. This mask, a mask of a friend, of Rose, is typical. James A. Porter best typifies the spirit of the Negro Renaissance in that he was a man of letters as well as an artist. He was a painter, painting what he felt, what he saw, and depicting those things that were close to him in ordinary life. But he was also a scholar, recording for us the history of the time, giving a definitive study of the history of the black American artist from slavery into the 1940s. On the basis of his knowledge, on the basis of his research, we find a rich heritage of forms that have come to us out of the African tradition. And this is much of what the Negro Renaissance was about, a rebirth of all of that energy, a rebirth of all of the lifestyling and of all of the forms that had been a part of that glorious past. In the words of Alien Locke, a return to the ancestral arts of Africa were evident in much of the work that was being created in this period. And so the depiction of the black image continues with Eldeza Carter in the late 1940s as he shows us an interior scene which of course reveals a new direction. It is a direction which emphasizes the new realism of the time as well as one which borders on surrealism. Now we see that the black artist begins to spread out his directions. Here they are showing the competency of his style in many, many ways. The exactness of his use of brush stroke, the way he applies his color. He is moving now towards a kind of universal style, that which is being done by artists in America and other places as well. Claude Clark followed the tradition of the social commentary artist in many of his works. These works date back to the early 1940s when he was very much caught up in the fervor of the times, redepicting history from the past, the black history of slavery. This particular painting, Slave Lynching, he gives us a vivid portrayal of the horror, the violence of the period. At the same time, he is also incorporating the feeling for the new revival of the new birth, of the new Renaissance, the ideas that are back as Americans refresh their minds on the past that they have had. And so, with the artistry of the period, we also get the social depictions of the time. Now, Jacob Lawrence is one of the best known of all black American artists. His art echoes many aspects of the black American experience. He has looked at history with the discerning eye of a critic. He has narrated it, black history all the way from Haiti, the advent of the Haitian Revolution, Toussaint Louverture, who becomes the general who brings Haiti into freedom, and then themes which reflect city life, black life on the American scene. This art is narrating in painterly form many of the themes that we're familiar with, the teeming ghettos, the return to the north, as well as the journey home, those who migrate from one part of the country to the other. the migration series, the war series, those dealing with the lowly life of the city as well as the lowly life of the rural communities. In Acrobats, one sees children on a subway, people sitting around on a subway, all of the things that happen when one is riding the fast-moving transportation systems. The parade, all of the gaiety of life which goes on in the parade taking place in Harlem, in New Orleans, echoing all of the things that happen with that time of merrymaking. So Lawrence recalls so many different things in his work, but he's an accomplished painter working basically with one medium, tempera, laying it in flat, showing all of the planes, the levels of interpretation. And he gives to us a sense of knowing what all of these things are about and what all of the themes that we see in his work are about. And in the work of Charles White, one of the giants, one of the greats when it comes to painting and draftsmanship, echoing a sense of knowing the dignity of his people, knowing them because he's close to them and he feels a part of them. That which, of course, centers on giving beauty to every life. The monumentality of his work, the dynamic skills that he exhibits, all of these things help to make him one of the most important of all the artists we've seen. And he shows us graphically the power of the form, the human form, always people, art that is humanistically related. This composition that we're looking at now, Take My Mother Home, a theme that is universal. Everybody knows it. Everybody has seen it. Everyone has felt it. Motherhood has played a very important role in all of the artists' lives, and that theme has been repeated over and over again. A son takes his elderly mother home. And in the composition here, White concentrates again on the mother, the expectant mother. She is to give life, new life. And there is in her personality not so much the joyousness that is to come later. He expresses the physical here, but there is also the spiritual to be revealed. Charles White gives us all of these dimensions in his work, and we are all aware of what it is that he's saying. Though the faces are black, he is actually speaking a universal language. This is a language which is peculiar to all humanity. Phil Woodruff shows to us a style which is different in scope from those we've seen, in that it is expressive, close to what is referred to as the abstract expressionism. And this style fits into the ongoing trend of American art. Upon viewing such a work, one would not relate it to what has been described as the black experience. But his roots go back to the 1930s, when he depicted the rural life of the South, the paintings of the Amistad murals, and others that show him as an artist expressing those scenes that depict Black American life. That the Black American artist has been able to digest numerous styles, forms of expression from from other aspects of American art is evident in the work of Alma Thomas. And she shows through her use of color, the importance of the colorist tradition which comes out of the Washington School of Colorists. She's a member of that school in the spirit of her painting, and it is as modern and as expressive as anything that has happened in American art in the last 10 years. Romare Bearden, giant among artists in American art, certainly one of the greats among black American art. He reflects the tempo of the time, also that legacy of Africa, the return to the ancestral arts of Africa as advocated by Alain Locke, the recapturing of the spirit of the times of the Negro Renaissance. But this is a contemporary painting which shows the same theme that Locke was talking about. It echoes the rhythm of the past, while at the same time it speaks of today. This composition, The Woodshed, a collage, a combination of many materials, paper, burlap, combined with canvas, cardboard, showing various facets of the artist's experience, all part of the genre of his time. The black American artist finding his way in a social world where criticism, where art forms were all a part of the mainstream. This mainstream showing every aspect of American art. Aaron Douglas, pioneering, showing the new symbolism. Edwin Holston, showing the new attitude in portraiture. Romare Bearden, showing a new concept of what had been referred to by Senghor as negritude, that presence of the African personality, regardless of where he went. This is what is shown, this is what is exemplified in so many of the works that we have seen. But it also goes beyond that. It is a vital part of the ethnic content which goes towards making the American art scene one of the most interesting, one of the most fascinating in the world, for it is a mixture of many signs, of many symbols, of many times, all coming together to make a vital part of what we refer to today as American culture.
This week on Time Capsule.
Juvenile justice, reform or rejection. Critics claim the state training school for boys in Eldora is a revolving door for Iowa's teenage criminals. Drug counseling is nearly non-existent, and a steady stream of new arrivals forces officials to release boys before they're ready. I'm Kent Peterson. We'll take an insider's look at a $5 million a year program many people say isn't working.
Join host Dave Buzik for Time Capsule, Sunday at 5:30 on TV8.
In Ottumwa, tune to Translator Channel 74 for better reception of TV8. You're on TV8, KCCI.